Barter, the Great Spaghetti Disaster. In the small village of Giggleworth, there lived a man named Mr. Wiggles. He was known for his passion for cooking, but he was also famously clumsy. One sunny morning, Mr. Wiggles decided to pursue his biggest dream, to create the world's longest spaghetti noodle. He started with great enthusiasm, mixing the dough and rolling it out in his tiny kitchen. But the spaghetti didn't stay in the kitchen for long. It grew and grew, stretching out of the window, winding down the street, and finally wrapping itself around the village square. The villagers gathered in amazement. Children laughed and jumped over the spaghetti. Like a skipping rope, Old Lady Tumbleworth began knitting a scarf out of it, and the mayor's goat, Harold, happily nibbled away at the noodle. Proud of his creation, Mr. Wiggles exclaimed, "Behold, the world's longest spaghetti noodle." But his triumph was short-lived. While carrying a huge pot of tomato sauce to finish his masterpiece, Mr. Wiggles tripped over the spaghetti itself. The pot flew through the air, and the sauce landed everywhere, on the spaghetti, the villagers, and even on Harold. Chaos ensued as the villagers froze in shock, but within moments, they all burst into laughter. Instead of being upset, they turned the disaster into a feast. They began eating the spaghetti right there in the street. Children slurped it up. Harold chewed happily, and Old Lady Tumbleworth declared, "This is the best spaghetti scarf I've ever made." Covered in sauce but smiling, Mr. Wiggles said, "Well, it might not be the world's longest noodle, but it's definitely the tastiest disaster." From that day on, the people of Giggleworth celebrated Spaghetti Day every year. They held noodle knitting contests, sauce fights, and Harold the goat was always the guest of honor. And so, the Great Spaghetti Disaster became a cherished memory, proving that sometimes the biggest messes create the best moments. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more funny stories. Vraker, the Talking Parrot, Prank. In the bustling town of Chatterville, there lived a mischievous old man named Mr. Tucker. He owned a parrot named Max, who was no ordinary bird. Max was a master of mimicry and had learned to imitate voices so perfectly that he could fool anyone. One day, Mr. Tucker, bored and looking for fun, decided to pull a prank on his neighbor, Mrs. Penny, who was notorious for being a nosy gossip. Mr. Tucker taught Max to say, "Help! Help! Someone's stealing," in a perfect imitation of his own voice. Max practiced until it sounded flawless. The next morning, while Mrs. Penny was watering her garden, she heard a desperate cry from Mr. Tucker's house. "Help! Help! Someone's stealing." Mrs. Penny dropped her watering can and ran to the window. She peeked inside, expecting to see burglars, but all she saw was Max, perched calmly on his stand, munching on a cracker. Confused, Mrs. Penny returned to her garden, but no sooner had she picked up her watering can than she heard it again. "Help! Help! Someone's stealing." This time, Mrs. Penny rushed to the front door and pounded on it. Mr. Tucker opened the door with a wide grin. "What's the matter, Mrs. Penny?" he asked, pretending to be surprised. "Your house. Someone's stealing," she stammered. Mr. Tucker stepped aside to reveal Max, who cheerfully squawked, "Help! Help! Someone's stealing." Realizing she'd been tricked, Mrs. Penny's face turned red with embarrassment. But before she could scold him, Max added in a perfect imitation of her voice, "I'm telling everyone about this." The entire street burst into laughter. Mrs. Penny couldn't help but laugh too, shaking her head at the cheeky bird. From that day on, Max became the town's favorite troublemaker, and Mr. Tucker's house was always full of laughter and pranks. Moral of the story: never trust a parrot with a sense of humor. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe for more funny stories.